Before the reform, education was not a primary focus for Americans. There were district schools, which everyone within the area attended, but had limited curriculum. There were also private academies and colleges. However, due to the Land Ordinance of 1785, with which Congress tried to consolidate schools and make education mandatory, most areas only had district schools. The objectives for education were poor in general, but were the worst for lower classes. Most lower classes did not attend school, but some lower and middle class citizens attended grammar schools, in which they only taught grammar and bookkeeping. The reform's main purpose was to place Protestant teachings in schools, promoting good morals and such. The enforcement of Protestant teachings resulted in the alienation of Catholic immigrants and their beliefs. This caused the Catholics to create their own private schools, and is evident today in the number of still existing private Catholic schools.
Ralph Waldo Emerson was born on May 25, 1803, in Boston, Massachusetts. Emerson began the Transcendentalist movement with the publishing of his first essay, Nature, in which he expresses the importance of nature. A year later, he gives the speech, The American Scholar, on August 31, 1837, to the Phi Beta Kappa Society at Cambridge, Massachusetts. This speech focused more on educational values. Emerson states that the scholar's education consists of three influences: nature as the most important influence on the mind, the past manifest in books, and its action and its relation to experience. Emerson becomes one of the most famous essayists, lecturers, and philosophers. Emerson made a living as a lecturer, and by the 1850s, he was making as many as 80 speeches a year. Emerson taught school for his uncle in Waltham, and later opened a finishing school for girls. However, he did not enjoy teaching. He also became a minister, but left that profession as well. Emerson also formed the Transcendental Club, which included members such as Bronson Alcott, Henry David Thoreau, and Elizabeth Peabody.
Elizabeth Peabody was a student of Emerson's. Peabody was born in Belersham, Massachusetts on May 16, 1804. When she became an adult, she moved to Boston, where she began teaching. During this time, she also became a writer. She worked as an assistant teacher with Amos Bronson Alcott at his experimental Temple School. When the school closed, Peabody wrote and published Record of a School, in which she outlined the plan of the school and included Alcott's philosophy of early childhood education. Peabody later opened Elizabeth Palmer Peabody's West Street bookstore at her home. Here, she held meetings between women in which topics such as fine arts, history, and mythology were discussed and debated. In 1860, Peabody opened a kindergarten school, which helped establish kindergarten as an accepted institution in American education. Peabody's sister, Mary Tyler Peabody Mann, was married to Horace Mann, another important figure in the educational reform.
Horace Mann was born on May 4, 1796, in Franklin, Massachusetts. Mann argued that universal public education was the best way to discipline the children of the nation. Mann is credited as the father of the Common School movement, Common School meaning public schools. He began his involvement in the educational reform when he was appointed secretary in 1837 of the newly created Board of Education in Massachusetts. Mann's views on education were widely accepted, especially by the Whig Party. He established the first public school system in Massachusetts, which was adopted by many other states such as New York. In these public schools, the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, were focused on. Mann wanted to ensure that teachers had efficient training. In 1838, Mann founded the Common School Journal, in which he discussed the public school and its problems. His 6 main principles were: 1. The public school should no longer remain ignorant. 2. That such education should be paid for, controlled, and sustained by an interested public. 3. That this education will be best provided in schools that embrace the children from a variety of backgrounds. 4. That this education must be non-sectarian. 5. That this education must be taught by the spirit, methods, and discipline of a free society. And 6. That education should be provided by well-trained professional teachers. Mann also ensured that schools had sufficient supplies, longer school years, higher pay for teachers, and a wider curriculum. In addition to the 3 R's, schools also had subjects such as history, grammar, and geography. In 1852, Mann adopted the Prussian education system in Massachusetts, which included obligatory attendance, specific training for teachers, national testing, and a national curriculum. This system was later adopted by the governor of New York. Mann also aided in women's role in the education reform, creating new career opportunities for women as teachers.
A prime example of this is Mary Lyon. Lyon was born on February 28, 1797 in Massachusetts. Lyon is considered a pioneer in women's education. She attended various district schools and began teaching in them by 1814. She taught at several academies, including one of her own, Sanderson and Buckley. In 1837, Lyon created the Mount Holyoke Female Seminary, a college for women. In this college, she began to change the role of women in society by requiring students to take 7 courses in sciences and mathematics, which was unheard of at other female institutes. Emma Willard, another important figure in women's education, was born on February 23, 1787 in Berlin, Connecticut. Willard also greatly contributed to the system of women's schools. At age 15, Willard enrolled in her first school, and 2 years later she began teaching. She, influenced by the material at her nephew's school, began to encourage women to master subjects such as mathematics and philosophy. She then wrote A Plan for Improving Female Education in 1819, a pamphlet in which she included a proposal for a women's seminary to be publicly funded like men's schools were. She eventually received a response from New York Governor DeWitt Clinton, who allowed her to open a school there. Thus, she created the first school in America for women's higher education, the Troy Female Seminary in Troy, New York, in September 1821. The school included a curriculum with subjects not usually taught to women.
The format for the textbooks in most of the schools was pioneered by Noah Webster. Webster was born on October 16, 1758, in West Hartford, Connecticut. Webster briefly taught at Connecticut district schools. Later, he composed 3 school books that he believed would unify the nation through speaking and writing a common language. Before the reform, most American school books were reprints of imported British school books. Webster wrote a 3-part book, A Grammatical Institute of the English Language, used to aid children in spelling. In the late 1700s, he began editing periodicals in New York. He then helped open a private school in New Haven. He then continued writing school books, including Elements of Useful Knowledge, in the early 1800s. Webster issued several other school books. His name eventually became synonymous with dictionary, evident in the naming of the modern Merriam-Webster dictionary that was first published by Webster in 1828, but titled An American Dictionary of the English Language. Another essential contributor to textbooks was William McGuffey. McGuffey was born on September 23, 1800, in Claysville, Pennsylvania. McGuffey was a professor at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, where he wrote McGuffey Readers, one of the nation's first and most widely used series of textbooks. McGuffey strongly believed in Protestant teachings, evident in his lessons.
During the education reform, the Lyceum movement also flourished. In lyceums, lectures, concerts, and other programs were held. Josiah Holbrook, a traveling lecturer, founded the first American Lyceum, Millbury Branch No. 1 of the American Lyceum, in 1826. Public lyceums were founded throughout the entire country. Famous education reformers such as Ralph Waldo Emerson gave speeches at many local lyceums. Even Abraham Lincoln gave a speech to a lyceum in Springfield, Illinois. As lecturers and entertainers performed at many lyceums, the term Lyceum Circuit became popular. After the American Civil War, lyceums began to be used as venues for entertainers, but were still used for public speeches by many notable public figures. Education began to improve throughout the reform, but reverted back to unimportance during the Civil War. The educational system began to deteriorate because of decrease of funding and loss of infrastructure and personnel. Both expenditures and enrollment declined during the Civil War, and educational funds went towards the war. As the early 1900s approached, education was revived, and kindergartens and preschools became more common. There was also an increase in public schools and a decrease in private schools. High schools also added more courses to its curriculum, as seen in education today.